Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes a todos los que nos estéis escuchando. No sé desde dónde nos estaréis escuchando en el momento que lo hagáis, pero igualmente os doy la bienvenida y os agradezco que dediquéis un ratito a escucharnos a lo largo de esta entrevista. Hoy vamos a tener la suerte de contar nuestra entrevista con Cormack Ryan. Y la idea es intentar acercar un poquito más la figura de Louis Gifford y el legado de Louis Gifford a España, porque es una persona que a nivel internacional tiene mucho reconocimiento, pero en España quizá le conocemos un poquito menos por la barrera lingüística. Y bueno, pues es una forma de hacer un poquito un homenaje a Gifford, y para ello contamos con la suerte de tener a Cormack Ryan entre nosotros. Así que vamos a comenzar. So, first of all, Cormack, welcome, and thank you very much for accepting doing this interview, where we will try to get to know better Louis Gifford.
Buenos días, Carlos.
Buenos días. Well, Cormack, Louis was a physiotherapist who was loved by all the physios that had the chance to meet him or even read his books. But however, here in Spain, we have the language barrier that makes Luis to be less known in our country. And his work inspired the work of two colleagues of us, two physiotherapists, Spanish physiotherapists, Federico Montero and Miguel Ángel Galán, in the unit of active coping strategies in chronic pain. And that's why we would like that Gifford's legacy is present in the Congress of October here in Valladolid. As far as I know, Cormack, you are the editor of the journal Pain and Rehabilitation, which was an initial project promoted by Gifford and Felipa, I think.
That's right.
Wife. Yeah. And well, it's a pleasure for me to talk with you as one of the people who has continued his work. So first of all, I would like you to make maybe a self-introduction for the people who may not know you here in Spain. Could you tell us who you are?
Sure. Okay, so my name is Cormack Ryan. I'm Professor of Clinical Rehabilitation at Teesside University, as well as being the Community Pain Champion for the Flip and Pain Public Health Campaign here in the UK. I'm also the co-editor of Pain and Rehabilitation, which is the journal of the Physiotherapy Pain Association, which you alluded to just now, and was the journal started by Louis and Philippa about 20 years ago now, just over 20 years ago. They were both very active in what we call the PPA, the Physiotherapy Pain Association here in the UK, which is a sub-branch of the UK Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. And it's a kind of a grouping for physiotherapists who have a real sort of specific interest in pain and pain management. And Louis very much led the way in the early days of that organization, which now has 600 plus members, is very active and continues to publish his journal, and indeed Philippa's journal 20 years on. And it's a real honor, to be honest, to be asked by yourself and the committee to talk about Louis and his legacy, because he was so hugely influential to me personally, but also to so many physios in the UK and indeed well beyond that. And it's testimony to that this interview is occurring. And so I'm just deeply honored and very grateful for the opportunity.
Well, it's the honor is for us, and it's a pleasure to have you here talking about this important man for our profession. Could you tell us, Cormack, from your point of view, Who was Louis Gifford? How would you explain the impact that his work has had in the physiotherapy world for the people who may don't know him here?
I think he was one of the most influential physiotherapists of the past 20 or 30 years. Certainly within the pain world. And he was so influential because, well, for many reasons. He was extremely insightful, and that insight in terms of working with patients and really sort of getting to know them and really listening to their problems and their challenges. He married that with a curiosity, a real drive to learn, to understand, to better his own practice, to be the very best that he could deliver for his patients. And alongside that was a very sharp mind and a committed mind that read extensively. He was, I mean, those of you who will have read his Aches and Pains book, there's after each bit, it says, read what I've read.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, it's quite daunting, because you think, I could live 2 lifetimes and not read all those books.
Absolutely.
But he obviously had a sharp enough mind that he could do all that, and then bring all of that together in what is a very mixed, jumbled up, different areas of knowledge and information, and bring them all into one. And then the output are very clear communications about understanding pain and its biopsychosocial nature, understanding the sort of neurophysiology and the immune involvement and all the other systems involvement in that pain experience, and then making that accessible to his patients. I think he was a big believer in communicating this information to his patients, and then also to other healthcare professionals. His legacy will be very educational. I would say there's been a huge movement over the past 20 or 30 years around a sort of a pain science education approach, led by some of the greatest minds, I guess, in certainly in the physio world and in the educational world. And you immediately think of people like Lorimer Moseley and David Butler, who have very much championed this area. However, I don't think it would be at all unreasonable to put Louis in that same category. He was hugely influential in bringing that approach to the mainstream and pushing it. He was there at the very, very start, and his materials are still alive, very much alive today, continuing that movement. Hugely influential.
Yeah, totally agree. And when you read his books, you feel that they are alive. You almost feel that Louis is with you. That's what I felt when I read the books. For me, it was like a mind-blowing experience, because it was like, wow, this is what I needed to know. And it was like Louis was there. I have the feeling that I know him, even I didn't met him in life, but it was quite impressive.
Absolutely. And I think that communication point is one we'll probably come back to again and again over the course of this conversation. His ability to communicate verbally, but especially through the written word. He has a lovely conversational style to the narrative that, alongside that, doesn't dumb down the science. It doesn't talk down to the reader. It very clearly and succinctly describes the concepts, and warmly describes the concepts and the points he's trying to put across, so that the reader can access it. I would say that a lot of his work is more akin to like popular science books. So those who write popular science have a wonderful gift of being able to take complex scientific principles and write them in a way that any general person could pick it up, read it, and go, oh yeah, I can follow those concepts. He wrote very much in that way, which is why his work was so accessible, and perhaps why he was so popular and successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's one of the things that make his books and his contributions so valuable for the clinician, because the clinician need this kind of information, this kind of transferring the knowledge of the science to the clinical part, to the daily practice with patients, with human beings, and that's what Gifford did extremely great.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that it's inevitable that we're going to talk about the mature organism model.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, but let's go.
I think probably if you're looking for like a snippet or a one sentence summary of his key legacy, the mature organism model could well be it. And I think it kind of exemplifies what we've been discussing, that ability to take concepts that are really challenging and make them accessible. I think if you look at some of the great writers and sort of theorists in pain over the past, let's say, 50 years, if you think of people like Wall and Melzack and Wolf, those guys, they wrote at an exceptionally high level, and they communicated some and developed some of the science in this area, which was just phenomenal. However, they were written, I would argue, a lot of the time for the scientific community, and they almost had to be, because that was the medium and the nature of that work.
Yeah.
But that work was, by default of being scientifically written, not necessarily easy to access for most clinicians.
Yeah.
The language was just different. It was too far removed from clinical language. What Louis did with the mature organism model is he took things like sort of pain gate theory and made them more clinical. He put a clinical narrative through them, which immediately made them accessible to clinicians like you and me. And what's, by doing that, it helps the clinician to show how they can be used within a clinical setting. Taking something that's scientific and theoretical and packaging it up into something that's clinical and practical. And I suspect a lot of people have had, clinicians like us have had sort of eureka moments when we've read something, where we've read the mature organism model or some of other Louis' writings and gone, I've perhaps vaguely understood that concept before, but now, as things like the mature organism model, now you're like, oh yeah, now it makes absolute sense, and now I can see how it can be used practically within my everyday work. That's a perfect example of his communicative ability, which I think has made him so popular and keeps his work so popular.
Yeah, totally agree. I think he was a gift to communicate everything, communication with the patient, communication to the community of physiotherapy. I also think that communication is a great skill that we need to develop as a physiotherapist in clinical practice. He was gifted for this. Yeah, sure.
Right. And he was very comfortable with people. I say this having only met him once, so I don't want to overstep the boundary and give some suggestion that I knew Louis, extensively. Unfortunately, I didn't. Our paths just didn't cross all that much, primarily because of age. I was really only coming into the field during Louis' last years, unfortunately. However, during that brief time when I did see him speak and engage, he was just so comfortable with everyone he was speaking to there, and that resonates with his sort of life story. If you see, he had, comfortable, informal, engaged conversations with the greats of the pain science community, such as the aforementioned Pat Wall, with whom I think they had a very positive and close relationship. Certainly sort of from a work perspective, but at the same time, you can see from his writings how comfortable he was with patients, and how good he was in chatting to them and speaking to them. And then within the sort of educational circuit, I certainly saw him in that sphere, and he was just such a so at ease with talking to people, regardless of whether they were a professor or a student. It didn't matter to him, and quite rightly so.
Yeah, totally. Here in Spain, we are trying there is a project to translate the aches and pains books. Hopefully it will be finally translated, because I think that it's a very, very interesting material for every physiotherapist. I think it's worth reading books. These books.
Absolutely. I think there are timeless writings. There are some be it journal articles or books or whatever, that they're every bit as relevant now as they were, when they were written, be that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago. And some of Louis' key writing is about 20 years old. If you late 90s, early 2000s. But if you pick them up and read them, you immediately can see how insightful they were, and how they still inform your practice, and you still learn something when you go back to them. I kind of, when I'm sort of refreshing for, let's say if I have to give lectures or seminars, or even if I'm sort of trying to remember a certain concept myself, I find there are a number of key texts that I kind of go back to. And often that includes Louis's writings, whether it's in topical issues with pain, or some sort of journal article he may have written. And more now, I kind of just go straight to the Aches and Pains book, because it's kind of a nice summary of all the aforementioned work he did. So I think the fact that you're making that accessible to the literally, however many millions of people who speak Spanish, there's a real practical impact there, which is awesome.
I hope it will be a reality in the future. I hope. Yeah, I totally agree with what you just mentioned, because I read the first time I have contact with Louis Gifford work was around 2016 or 17. So not so much time ago. And when I read the Aches and Pains, and after, when I started reading the previous ones, the topical issues on pain, I said to myself, oh my God, this man was saying these kind of things in the late 90s, and I'm just discovering it as if it was quite new, you know, and he was ahead of his time.
Absolutely. He was way ahead of his time. And you know, and it cuts back to our previous conversation, the fact that what you're reading right now is so similar to what he was writing 20 or 30 years ago. His writing is still current, it's still relevant, it's still informative and useful, and I think that's testimony to kind of, I guess, how far ahead he could see and indeed was, compared to many of us, myself included. You know, the great writers, I guess, and those great minds, their material is always worth going back to.
Sure. Cormac, just to finish this great talk, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Could you, regarding the journal that you are co-editor, could you explain a little bit about it? How did they start it, or how has it evolved? Or
so it started over 20 years ago. It was started by Louis and Philippa, and I think Philippa was a really important part of the engine room, as I understand it, because putting together a journal it's more than just the words on the paper. It's bringing things together, and I think it was very much a partnership between the two, and I think both have left a great legacy through that journal. I guess it was an opportunity, or a way of communicating a lot of good writing at the time. A lot of it being done by Louis, and if you look at the really early issues, you see there's an awful lot of his writing in there. And then over time, more and more contributors came on board. I think in the early days, it was primarily a sort of a newsletter. It was a newsletter for the Physiotherapy Pain Association, as well as a way of communicating a sort of novel physiotherapeutic ideas and pain science. And then over time, it's gone and been passed on to different editors. And I think each editor over time has brought something new to it. I guess each editor has been has felt sort of a little bit of joy that they've been sort of helping to maintain something that Louis started, because that, you know, it's a really nice thing to be able to do. And over time, it's developed into, I guess, a more academic journal. So it's now a peer-reviewed, double-blind journal. It's got my fellow co-editor, Dr. Chris Seenan, who's based at Glasgow Caledonian University, and Dr. Michael Mansfield, who's based at Birmingham, has come on as an associate editor. And then we've got our editorial board, and we welcome submissions from anywhere in the sort of pain and rehabilitation world. We're quite a broad church. We welcome submissions in a variety of different ways, you know, from systematic reviews, RCTs, cross-sectional studies, right the way through to audits and service evaluations. And many sort of more mainstream double-blind scientific journals don't really accept such a varied amount of submissions. They don't necessarily always go for audits or service evaluations. Whereas I think we're about not just about developing new knowledge, but also about spreading good practice. And I think service evaluations and audits have a great capacity to do that. And we also welcome novice writers. I think we're quite a supportive journal, although our reviewers can be as harsh as the reviewers at any academic journal. It's about then how you convey and work with the writer and the author to try and incorporate those reviewer comments and strengthen and make the work better. And I think we're an extremely supportive journal, which really tries to bring out the best in the material and the writer, which you don't always get with other academic journals. So I'd say we're a place that gives support and welcomes novice writers, which is not always the case. And I think that again fits with Louis' sort of mantra and approach of being an educational and supportive individual. And I hope that we maintain that with the journal of providing support for new authors. So, and just if any of your listeners, if they have pieces of research they've done, be they, as I say, from an RCT to a service evaluation, and they're looking for places to publish their work, they should really consider the journal. And they can find the journal online. Pain and Rehabilitation is its name. If you put it into Google, you'll find us.
Okay, I'm sure you are doing a great job there. And Cormac, yes, to finish, I would like to ask you one last question. What would be your advice for a novel physiotherapist who wants to dedicate their career to help people in pain, apart from reading Gifford's books that I will for sure recommend everyone? But what would be your advice?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to start there, just as you said. Reading good material is a great place to start, and Aches and Pains is it's not just a wonderful introduction into the topic. It's more than that. It's something that, I mean, we're both, you know, experienced clinicians who've been in the field for a while, but we can both go back to a book like that and still learn and still inform our practice. So definitely reading material such as that is the way forward. And I guess also, if when you read the book, you look at how much Louis learned from his patients. And I would echo that for any new physio, to learn from your patients. Each patient is a mini book in themselves.
Yeah.
They are a treasure trove of new information and new understanding, be they ones that fit textbooks personally or perfectly, and there is the odd patient that does fit the textbook perfectly, but even more so those who don't. Those who don't fit the textbooks, they're the ones that you learn the most from. Really listen to your patients and reflect on each one. And in that way, you'll give them the very best of you, but similarly, you'll learn the most from them. So that's probably the advice I would give. Listen to your patients.
Well, I think it's a great advice. I think I would have loved that somebody give me that advice when I was young. So thank you very much for sharing with us your views about Gifford, about physiotherapy. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And well, it's a pity that you cannot come in person to Valladolid.
How I wish I could have been there first. I would have loved it. I've been to Spain before, and it was just an absolute joy. And I hope it won't be long before I go again.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be more opportunities. Brilliant. So thank you very much, Cormac. It's been a pleasure. I wish you the very best.
Thank you, Carlos.